Welcome everybody. I'm Ros Osborne. I'm one of the project managers on the SEND Centre of Excellence here at Weston College. And I'm really delighted today that we have created a webinar based on what we thought was really pertinent at the moment, which is adapting and redesigning support programs for students with autism. And that's about the returning to on-site provision. But actually we've moved on from there, haven't we? We've been in this COVID landscape now for quite some time, but it's actually what we're doing and adapting for autistic learners, which is really paramount. Every day we are always looking at the practical measures to support those learners, and that's what Mel, our lead autism practitioner, Leela, our advanced practitioner in autism, and Nadine, our specialist practitioner in autism, will be covering today. A few little housekeepings, and that is to make sure that those who do have a question, for those who haven't heard me on the welcome, as you were arriving, there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen if you hover over it with your mouse, where you can pose a question. We try to answer as much live today as we can, or we can answer them off the webinar if we don't get a chance today. That's fantastic. So with no further ado, I will hand over to the team who will deliver the webinar today.
Good afternoon, everybody. So today we are going to be looking at how adaptations to provision are established for our students with autism, so that we can ensure that they're not at risk of disengaging in college life during the pandemic. We're going to look at models of delivery that have shaped and differentiated to minimise the impact on students' progress and success. We will be sharing current practices and opening discussions with participants to explore barriers and the successes and the best practices. At the end, we'll have a Q&A and a bit of a discussion time, so there'll be an opportunity for the group to share what is working well and any concerns around any topics. Next slide, please.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Leela. So we're just really, I'm going to whiz through the next couple of slides because I appreciate that some of this information you may already I've heard in our previous webinars, but just to contextualise really our autism support and how we've developed and adjusted it really to fit the current state of play. You can see here on the slide our specialist model in autism, which is a model that we've been delivering for some time before the pandemic. And in this model, specialist practitioners are involved in all aspects of a student's time at college, from initial assessment to putting in place transition arrangements. So as autism practitioners, we work with students outside their taught core curriculum sessions in either one-to-one tutorials or in small groups. And so this model really supports rejects the what we call Velcro approach of in-class support and favors a variety really of out-of-class interventions that are personalized to individuals. And it is imperative that we know the student in order to adopt person-centered working. Practitioners achieve this through our assessment process and partnership working with parents, carers and other professionals. Time spent with the learners in one-to-one tutorials and in the small group work that I previously mentioned. And the purpose really of this is to learn from the student how their autism affects them and together find strategies and techniques to overcome the difficulties that this presents. So at that point then, from the holistic viewpoint, we would then compile a profile of the student, which is then disseminated to other professionals working with that learner. The student profile, alongside in-house training and regular communication with curriculum staff, enable lecturers to understand the distinct differences in cognition of individuals with autism and to plan their teaching accordingly. So by working with both students and their teachers really helps minimize the anxiety and disengagement, which enables them to achieve their aspirations. So the quality of this provision, the autism provision, is that we need to support learners to be as independent as possible, and by supporting tutors to adopt strategies and approaches which meet needs. For example, making use of assistive technology, adjusting their delivery style, then learners are then enabled and empowered to access the curriculum. Next slide, please. So then we went into lockdown. So fortunately, our college had a very clear digital strategy in place prior to COVID-19. And what this meant really was that when we went into lockdown, there was a seamless transition to a virtual platform and remote delivery. The college invested highly in student technology, and they were able to do that through bursary and hardship funds. I'm not going to read all of this out because I'm aware that we've visited it quite a lot over time, but I could answer some questions later on if anybody wants any specific details. But despite all of this, the transition was not without its challenges, especially for learners with autism and associated difficulties. We needed to adapt quickly to a different way of teaching and learning and to support our students through that process. And this involved utilising our partners where we were unable to work with students directly. So, for example, because we went to the virtual platform, not all learners were able to access those platforms from home, and we were of course not able to go out and actually support them through that concrete learning experience. So what we were able to do in certain circumstances was actually work with parents and siblings of the student and actually train them how to use those platforms so that they could then support those students at home. So, as autism specialists, we understood the potential challenges our students would face, and we needed to look at all of the resources and the learning environments through that specific autism lens and anticipate the need. And that's really what we've been doing from the beginning and are still doing, every day, so that we could differentiate accordingly and work with the curriculum to adjust the delivery and the environment, and just to be flexible really in their approach. Next slide, please. Okay, so the return to college, and this is our blended approach. So as you can see, that the first slide looked at our specialist model, autism model, and there's been some additions to that. So for students who are unable to attend an on-site provision, distance education, has been pivotal in allowing them to continue with their educational aspirations. And I have to say, for a lot of our students with autism, this is the preferred method. I think one of Mel's students said recently he felt that he'd been training his whole life for this, but we need to consider that for individuals with autism, there is significant issues which should be considered before seeing a fully remote platform as a significant feature of a student's college experience. So the blended learning approach, which is what we've got up here and what we're now doing, addresses both the academic and the autism curriculum, and it gives the necessary degree of importance to the social, emotional, communication and sensory needs of individuals with autism. So a use of a variety of interventions personalised to students, and understanding their individual needs has obvious benefits. So our curriculum has blended in its approach to delivery, and as specialists, our model has had to blend also. And we're now using both the before the lockdown and after lockdown support practices in place. So to complement this practice, we've had to make further adjustments as shown here on the slide. So I'm just going to pick a couple of them out because, like I say, you can read yourself, that's fine. But I think one of the things really to sort of home in on is the fact that, we've extended our initial assessment phase. So as I spoke about earlier, we do our initial assessment, which starts right the way from sort of transition through really, I'd say, our first term, because we're just learning about that student all of the time and building that profile together on how we can best support them. And that's need to be extended. We need to give that additional time really to be able to get to know students, because we haven't had that face-to-face interaction, which is so key and important. One of the specific challenges that we anticipated really was the difficulties around the exams, and the fact that students, were giving having mock papers really, and sort of predicted grades as part of what they came out of school with. We anticipated really that would throw up some difficulties there in terms of students coming out perhaps with grades that were maybe a little bit higher than what they were actually able to that they were capable of, or quite the opposite actually, that they didn't come out with the grades that reflected their true ability. So the 42-day window has been crucial in sort of looking and managing the first sort of term of curriculum, and working really closely with them to assess that they are actually matched to the correct program of study, and to be able to make those adjustments and those movements as quickly as possible. One of the other things I really want to home in on is the special consideration. So since we've returned to on-site, we have a compulsory face mask wearing situation alongside one-way systems. And we've needed to really look at that from an individualistic perspective. Not all learners are able to wear face masks for a variety of reasons, but for students with autism, this is particularly difficult due to the sensory implications and also the communication difficulties as well. So some of our learners prefer to wear lanyards that identify themselves as being exempt. but some don't. And so we've needed to really look at ways in which we can support students to be able to identify themselves so they're not approached regularly by security staff or curriculum staff to say, you know, why aren't you wearing your face mask? The same with the one-way systems as well. So when we did our transition phase, bringing them back in, it was really important that learners were brought back in on a one-to-one basis and actually walked through the process, because what they need is those real concrete learning experiences to be able to cue them back into when they come. But sometimes the one-way system can also pose various challenges. So we've needed to make special dispensations around that, and also communicating that out to the rest of the college so that they're not sort of, you know, accosted by somebody as seen as breaking the rules. And that's something that we're continuously working with. Next slide, please.
Okay, we've gone to a different slide there that I wasn't supposed to change onto. So, excuse me. There we go, that's it, that's the slide that I needed, sorry about that. So these are just some of our learners' views that we wanted to share with you. Some of these are quite humorous, I'm not going to lie about that. But we wanted to just share with you some of the views, the comments that we've had from our learners, and the areas that it's actually raised in terms of what we're working on with them. So this first comment here, you know, obviously some of our learners have needed a little bit more support in some of the more basic aspects of COVID safety, and trying to support the logic that comes around students with autism can be quite interesting. As you can see from this first comment, this was a student who really couldn't understand why hand washing multiple times was necessary. We had to go through a whole process of why, because they had washed their hands at a different building and gone through several doors before they came into another room to eat, why it was then necessary that they should wash their hands. And that has followed a lot of support in terms of central coherence and just seeing the bigger picture, and again, looking at that personal hygiene aspect. This second quote here that we have, as you're probably aware, a lot of learners with autism struggle particularly with social interaction. And we have had to support a lot of our learners in coming to terms with the fact that they're not getting the social interaction and social opportunities that they had prior to lockdown. And we're having to support them to find alternative ways of interacting with their peers, and to also deal with the aspect of their social well-being, because that has been affected by those lack of social opportunities. This third comment, which I think is quite humorous, but it's something that one of our students has said. A lot of our learners tend to compartmentalise aspects of their life. So college life is very much for college and for learning and for doing their assessments and assignment work. Home is home, and they try to keep them quite separate. Obviously, with the aspect of remote learning coming into place, it's meant that these areas of different compartments have merged together. And this is something which our learners, whilst they logically understand the reasons why, they don't necessarily always like it, and we've had to do some work around that. This next section, one of our learners had to self-isolate after his dad contracted symptoms of COVID. Because of the sensory aspect of his autism, he would not entertain the thought of having a test. And we have to consider that for a lot of our learners, they would rather go into isolation than go through the sensory trauma, for want of a better word, of a test. And in this case, we had to work with the curriculum staff who really couldn't understand why this student couldn't just go and get a test. And in actual fact, were penalising him for non-attendance of lessons, as they just felt that he was self-isolating unnecessarily and that he was being difficult. So in this situation, this was something where we had to work as that cultural interpreter with the curriculum areas. This next section, I'm sure that a lot of you have probably come into contact with and have the same issues as well. Like a lot of buildings at the entrance to our colleges and our classroom campuses there, we have hand sanitisers in place. And again, because of the sensory nature of our learners, the sanitiser can cause a lot of discomfort. Most of our students are quite happy to use their own sanitisers, but we again have had to work with our security team in just helping them to understand that our students aren't being awkward, and explaining to them why we have these issues. This next comment is probably a little bit inappropriate in some ways, but we do support our learners with skills in preparing for employment. And this was a genuine comment that we had. I don't think I really need to say any more on what was said there. And this last comment here, you know, like schools and colleges across the country, we have different bubbles coming out of remote learning one day, going back into remote learning a different day. We've got members of staff that at the last minute are having to isolate and teach from home. And it's been really confusing for our learners in terms of keeping up with what's going on. With executive function and social communication being a challenge at the best of times, as staff members, we've had to be really on the ball in terms of ourselves knowing what's going on with different classes, and really helping out with the learners to kind of feed that information back as to when they are in. So next slide.
Hi, sorry, me again. So yeah, thank you, Mel. And I think, like, you know, what we've kind of talked about up until now is that actually there have been the impact on students with autism has been actually both positive and negative, which I think some people find, you know, don't really expect that there to be any sort of positive impacts really, but actually with our learners and the distinct differences in cognition, you know, a lot of the processes that have now been put in place because of COVID do really lend themselves to the psychological you know, processes that are involved with autism. So I just put a table up really to really sort of give both those viewpoints, which again, I won't read them all out, but just wanted to home in on a couple really. So really one of the key positives has been that, you know, the virtual learning has been, for a lot of our learners, not all, a preferred option. You know, not having to deal with the anxieties associated with a busy classroom does have, you know, obvious benefits. Having said that, what we have also experienced, as Mel sort of picked up really in some of those learner comments, is that, you know, because of the difficulties around compartmentalizing and boundary crossing due to the sort of, you know, cognitive rigidity, students do find it quite difficult sometimes to work from home, and actually having the students being able to come through on their virtual platforms in their bedroom has really felt like an invasion of their space, that they actually come home from college, de-escalate an energy account for the amount of energy that they've expended throughout the day facing all of those different challenges. So again, working with parents and sort of setting up specific spaces within the house that can be disassociated, if you like, with the rest of the home, that they can utilize as a learning environment has been really key. I had one family that actually cleared out the cupboard under the stairs and actually turned that into a study space, a bit like Harry Potter, but it worked because when he went into that room, he knew that was his time to study, and it was really important that those boundaries were put in place and definitive. A lot of our learners don't like to have the cameras on during the online virtual sessions, you know, for a couple of reasons really. One, they don't like the fact that people can see them and that they can't necessarily see them, but also it's that sort of, you know, monotropic processing, only being able to process one piece of sensory information at any one time. And so having that sort of visual stimulus there can be really off-putting when they're trying to process auditory information. The visual stimulus can really, you know, put them off, and therefore it just makes that communication even more tricky. So even for those that it is preferable, it's not necessarily beneficial. Like we've talked about before, that the social, emotional, and communication and sensory needs are not being developed through those concrete experiences. So we have had learners that have requested to remain actually as totally virtual within this process, and we really try to discourage that, you know, and ask them to come back in and work with them with some on-site, face-to-face delivery. But it has, you know, it has been really positive as well for us to be able to reach certain students that perhaps weren't engaging with our support before. To be perfectly honest, this particular platform is not something that we'd utilised particularly up until this point. You know, so we have recognised that actually some students do need this as a kind of stepping stone, really, to be able to start working with us, you know, on a sort of face-to-face on-site provision. So it's enabled us to really expand and develop and just, you know, look more at the way that we do things and be more creative. Another positive is the increased involvement and engagement from curriculum and partners and parents and carers. You know, we felt that it's been so much easier to communicate because of the online platform, sharing information on sort of our SharePoint sites, and also getting access to the content that they're actually delivering. We're able to access the online sessions more easily and go in and be able to do our observations and work with students alongside them in that perspective as well. So that's been really, really positive. people have kind of recognized that we're there more and really wanting to ask us about how they can differentiate their resources and sending us over what they've got and asking for our advice, which has been great, because historically that has been a challenge for autism practitioners, really, to actually get those relationships with the curriculum areas, and to, you know, for them to understand that we're there to support them. We're not trying to judge what they're doing or sort of come in from that perspective, but actually let's work together and see how we can overcome these barriers. The downside of this is that, you know, a remote delivery, and with the, you know, some of the remote sessions, it is a lot easier for students to completely disengage from lessons and from support as well. So, you know, again, having those relationships with partners and parents, and making sure that, you know, if we can't, you know, we can come through the back door, if you like, and contact parents and find out what's going on, and, you know, work with them in that respect, because we just aren't having that necessarily, you know, face-to-face contact like we did before. And really, just lastly, I just wanted to pick up on the last bit here. You know, the positive, again, as I said, that the rules and the clear guidelines do allow for a certain level of predictability for our students. That's really, really paramount. The lack of social imagination and the prediction errors that they occur due to their autism, you know, makes it very, very difficult for them to predict what's going to happen next. The rules and the regulations have really removed that side of it for them, and it does lend itself to those, you know, psychological processes that are very different to that of a neurotypical, and does reduce anxiety. There is that comfort in familiarity. The negative to this is that, particularly since we've come out of the full lockdown, is that a lot of these new rules are confusing and illogical. And I think it's fair to say that when, you know, especially for individuals with autism, but I think, you know, all of us really to a certain degree, if we can see the logic in the rules and regulations that we're asked to follow, then that's fine. But if we can't, then the chances of us actually complying with that are very slim. And for us as cultural interpreters, that's actually been a real challenge, because if we don't fully understand the logic around the rules, then it's difficult for us to be able to support them to understand it either. And so, you know, honesty is the best policy in that respect, and it's just trying to unpick really the bigger picture, which again is something that can be quite challenging, trying to take the sense from the nonsense, they say, but that is a continuing challenge, and I think, you know, Mel illustrated it in the quotes that she read out in the previous slide. You know, they can't necessarily understand why they can do one thing and not the other, and that is quite a challenge, and something that we consistently work with them in this ever sort of interchangeable situation. Okay, next slide, please.
So I just wanted to talk to you about a student that I've been working with. I started working with P just before lockdown, so I'd never actually met them face to face. P is an A-level student, so at the time he was in his first year of A-levels, and has a diagnosis of autism, anxiety, and has got quite a few other medical issues. So during the lockdown, it was a real challenge to actually get to know P and build up that trusting working relationship online. He was very clear that he preferred to use the chat function on Teams and definitely did not want the video or audio function. So that gave me a big challenge on how to gauge his responses to the conversations that we were having. At first, I would just check in with him on a weekly basis just to see how he was coping online with his learning and how he's coping with the social isolation. I didn't want to bombard him, and he completely disengaged with me at that point. I gradually asked more questions just to try and get to know him a bit better. I spoke to his mum on a regular basis because obviously she's the expert on him. And she gave me a lot of insight into his high intellect, but his struggles with communication, social and independent living skills. He was also extremely anxious when traveling, even with mum. He's completely dependent on her. So I thought that P would benefit from a summer transition, even though he was a returning student, to try and reduce any anxieties that he might have about returning to college. Mum actually doubted whether he would be able to overcome the anxiety of travelling to be able to attend, but actually he did. He did come in and have a transition with me. I met him for the first time face to face, and it gave me a real clear insight into the strength and bravery that he has when he's facing his fears. So P had travelling anxiety even before lockdown, but he was able to attend because his sister was one of our students, but she left in September. COVID completely exacerbated that anxiety because his fear was confrontation that somebody was going to come and ask him why he wasn't wearing a mask. He didn't have the social communication skills to be able to cope with that kind of situation. He didn't want to wear a lanyard because he didn't want to be visibly identified as having a disability. So Mum supported him and travelled 3 buses, taking an hour and a half each way, to and from college every day. And she also attended his support sessions. So I spoke with Pete about maybe a graded exposure to travelling independently. And as it happened, Mum unexpectedly was unable to travel with him one day, but because of his rigidity in thinking, he knew he had to be in college, and he called in this time. So we discussed what the anxieties were, and we discussed how we could overcome those anxieties. So we talked about changing our body language so that people were less likely to come and talk to him. So maybe when he sat on the bus to face the window, or listening to music, people were less likely to approach him then. We talked about that I could be a safety net for him. So I could be online on Teams for him. So if he was feeling anxious, he could communicate that with me. And I also said that if anybody did approach him and he felt that he couldn't communicate with them, then he could phone me. And if he was happy, I could talk to that individual and explain, which he hasn't used to this date. So now, Pete is travelling to and from college independently every day. He even said to his mum that he didn't want her support because he didn't want to go back on the hard work that he's done. So now we are working on boosting his self-confidence, because he's obviously got an amazing quality in being able to face his anxiety like that. We're also introducing him to Weston Bay on the road, which will help work on his social and communication skills, his independent living skills, and prepare him for uni. And it's also going to be a trend for him. He has decided to go to an aspirations course in September, which is an individualized program that we offer our learners with autism. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hi, so I wanted to just tell you about my student that I've been working with, student A. Student A came to us from one of the local secondary schools and decided that he wanted to study on the level 3 computing programme with us. Like a lot of students from school, when lockdown occurred in March, basically all lessons stopped and there were no online lessons at all for him to attend. And he quickly got used to not interacting, should I say, with other students and teachers. And like a lot of young people, his only interactions were with his immediate family and his friends using Discord, which I now know is a communication app which connects gamers to message with each other. As part of our transition plan before lockdown, we would have gone to visit him at school. We would have liked to have met him face to face. We would have liked to have established some contact prior to a visit when he came to college. And obviously this wasn't possible. We did try to set a meeting up via Zoom with his parents and him at home. But this didn't happen as he has absolutely huge anxiety around speaking online. We gleaned as much information as we could from home, and we tried to contact the previous school so that we could get a full picture of his needs and start to draw up the student profile and start to plan his support. As soon as we could, we arranged a transition visit for him to college, which I think occurred in July. This gave us an opportunity to introduce him to me as a specialist practitioner and to familiarise him with our College One Way system, for him to come and see our specialist resource area and the classrooms that he would be accessing, and he got an opportunity at that time to meet his tutor as well. Usually during the summertime, we would do travel training with any new students who need it. Obviously, there was restrictions in place along that time, and that combined with his huge levels of anxiety, we decided it wasn't possible, and we postponed it until he was in a much better place mentally. Once he began college in September, we started to complete our in-depth initial specialist assessment. That consisted of socially distanced face-to-face support sessions, numerous conversations with his parents and with his tutors to see how he was coping with the coursework and the college environment. And we also planned when the travel training would start with one of our specialist support workers. We have had numerous conversations between us as specialist staff and the curriculum. This student in particular has struggled with some quite basic but key elements of the course. And we found that rather than this being something that's a result of his academic ability, it's being more associated to his anxiety, but at least by kind of communicating with the curriculum area, we've been able to really establish what his needs are. It has been tricky. Leela mentioned earlier that because of the teacher assessment and predicted grade element, that we've had a lot of differentiation to do it, and it has been difficult, and it was particularly with this learner. He felt that he was much more able because of the grades that he got when he had his grades through. And we've needed a much more of a thorough and a prolonged time to assess his academic ability than we would have perhaps in non-COVID times. In addition to the assignment support that he's been given, we've also had to put in an extra element of support that we never would have had to put in for any of our learners before. Although this student is coming into college for a lot of lessons, he also has timetabled a lot of remote lessons and online sessions, but he struggles hugely with the accessing anything online. He gets anxiety about using the chat function. He gets huge anxiety about speaking. He won't speak at all. He doesn't really understand the social etiquette in using the chat function, and that verbal interaction is really tricky for him. He also struggles with the executive function element of kind of even going in a little bit beforehand and preparing himself. So this student, even though he's got remote online sessions that he could, kind of feasibly do at home, he's been coming into college and using our autism resource area and accessing these online remote sessions actually with us, so that there is somebody on hand constantly to give him a little bit of extra support and help him adjust, so that if we do ever have to go into a lockdown situation again at home, hopefully he will develop those skills necessary if that happens. As well as accessing our specialist support area for the curriculum aspects of the college, he's also been accessing our support area and has developed some social interaction skills with new students. He's developed friendships, he's adding them onto Discord chats, and we found that without us being here, he really would have struggled a lot more in college, and we have seen really the necessity of that extra support for him. We're really pleased with the progress that he has made. He still it's got a long way to go, but in terms of the progress he's made, we're really pleased with that. So next slide.
Oh, I've come up here. Sorry, I thought Ros was delivering the slide, but that's fine. I'll jump in, not a problem. Okay, so really just to summarise what we've talked about and the good practice that we believe that we've exhibited and that we're continuing to deliver is really that investment in specialist staff in autism. So as I stated in that sort of first slide, really all of the practitioners that work within the autism team are qualified and educated to degree standard at a minimum, specifically within autism and associated difficulties. And the reason behind that is because well-meaning people actually miss the point when it comes to support with autism in particular. It's important that we understand the theory behind autism, and then that we are able to relate that to our practical experiences whilst working with students. So the collaboration, which we've talked about a lot with parents and external agencies, is really, really important, but particularly at the moment where perhaps we haven't had access to the students in the way that we would have had previously. It's been imperative that we've built those relationships with the support network of our students so that they can support in place of where we would have been previously. The flexibility of the programs of study is really been key as well. So at the moment, for example, I've just been negotiating for a specific student to come out of the math sessions that he was struggling to engage with for a variety of reasons, and we've been able to negotiate some one-to-one math tuition in place of that. And in order for us to be able to really utilize this flexibility, we've needed to acquire additional space within our campuses. So we've talked already about our low arousal resource areas across sites, but to be able to comply with the social distancing, we've really needed to expand that additional space so that the learners are able to come and still access the autism architecture really that we have in place there. Even more so whilst maintaining the safety arrangements, but also because we've needed to input those additional assignment supports, the additional tutoring. And as Mel said, a lot of learners aren't able to access the virtual remote platforms from home and have needed that consistent support. So they need somewhere to come and be able to log on. And if there are any difficulties that happen technologically, there is somebody there to help them problem solve and re-engage with that session. Whereas if they didn't have that, then that possibly would be the end of that particular lesson and they would disengage completely. So that's been something that we're really very grateful and lucky to be able to have really from our senior leadership, that they acknowledged the needs there and have provided us with those resources. So the dual curriculum that we spoke about earlier is really imperative. The lower arousal environments, which I've talked about, and also we do offer CPD. Did I say CPD? That our level 2 awards in autism, but we also go out and do sort of in-house training all of the time as well. But we are very lucky in the respect that we are offered a lot of CPD and upskilling of our staff throughout. And that consistent collaboration with the curriculum areas, again, and the flexibility in the approach. I think one other thing to mention actually that perhaps we didn't, is that because of the situation, Dean talked a lot about the travelling aspect of a lot of our students, and we do have quite a few students that are what we consider out of county learners, and due to the difficulties with public transport, the fact that bus services are running at a reduced capacity, there have been lots of difficulties around students actually coming in the morning, and say, for example, they might have a couple of lessons in the morning, but then maybe their afternoon sessions are remote, or maybe they don't have any sessions in the afternoon, but then there isn't actually a bus to be able to take them home. The college-wide sort of ethos at the time, has been that where you don't need to be on campus, don't be on campus. But for learners that actually don't have anywhere else to go because they're still waiting for a bus that perhaps isn't going to pick them up, or local authority transport that is bringing them in at set times and are leaving at set times, they have been left sort of stranded at the college campus without any particular structure. And again, with autism, that structure is really, really important, and they do find it very, very difficult to structure their unstructured times. So we've needed to put in place programs whereby with the additional resources spaces that we've acquired, to make sure that actually we can support them in their unstructured time, that they are doing something worthwhile and productive whilst they're with us, and that they're safe until we can make sure that they're back on their buses to go home. But that again has been quite a challenge, and students understandably don't really particularly want to be hanging around on a college campus when they could be going home. So it's been difficult to work with the sort of rationale around why they have to do that. Okay, next slide.
Hi everyone. So I knew what was coming. I should have just started beginning to chat. Thank you for everybody who delivered on that. Thank you, Leela, Mel, and Nadine. we know it happens, but the hard work that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see, and I'm sure it resonates with many of you on this webinar today. So we do have a question over to the team. So thank you to Meave McDonald. So thank you so much for this one. But what particular considerations have you given to the low arousal environment? And actually, this is a really great question because it's probably a very considerable answer. So Mel or Leela, would you like to answer that one? What particular considerations have you given to the low arousal environment?
Hello, sorry. Who was going to hit the button first?
That's fine.
We'll do a two-prong. Okay, so our low arousal environments are, designed specifically from the perspective of what we understand around the theory of autism, really. So it needs to be visual stimulus has to be incredibly low, so we don't have any additional posters or notices on the board that are anything other than instructional. So it's, we don't just have any, our walls are incredibly plain and very, I suppose some might say, boring. But again, that is really distracting for students visually, and we've done sort of surveys and things with our learners and asked them, about whether or not they appreciate designs on the walls and notices, and actually they don't. So the only things that we have are our Western Bay activities calendar and things that are instructional, so reminding them about the hand sanitizing and their calendars and things like that. We plan it all, our desks are incredibly clear, we don't have any clutter, everything is very uniformed, and there is a real sort of structure to the layout. We have muted tones, nothing bright, nothing too jazzy. We also have some sensory equipment that we have on site, so lots of different sensory objects that our students like to use if they're becoming quite anxious. So cushions and things like that, weighted blankets we have access to. Lighting needs to be low and dim rather than bright and stark. We have dividers in the sensory room, in our sensory offices, whereby students are able to sit and study without those additional stimuluses as well. We don't eat in the rooms, so that the smell is, we don't bring in, like, smelly curries and things like that and have our lunch. It's not an office. We don't use it as a staff room. It's a student resource area. We have lots of games available to our learners, and really we just try to listen to them and tailor. You can't meet everybody's needs. Not everything's going to be perfect for everybody, but we, like I say, we take that knowledge that we have and try to implement that really with our working practices with students. Mel, have I missed anything there?
I don't think so. I think I was just going to say, however, that I think that the COVID landscape has almost helped kind of look at how we do things in terms of that autism friendly element. We made a point of trying to declutter everywhere prior to the COVID kind of situation, so that everything would be easier to clean and things like that. I think that's really helped. I think definitely having somewhere just to sit and decompress. We have somewhere that quite often our learners will put their headphones on, so that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely noise is a massive, so we used to have a while ago, we used to have a support office that was down the music corridor, which, just wasn't fit for purpose. I mean, you'd be in there and there'd be, someone banging drums and strumming on, which it was just, but all of these things need to be taken into consideration. In an ideal world, we would have something that we would, like an eco house, that we would be able to build bespoke, then actually every aspect of how that was put together would be done through that autism lens. But quite often in education, we're not afforded such luxuries. So you do just get given a space and you have to do what you can to make it as accessible and as fit for purpose as possible. Has that answered your question, or have we missed the point?
Very helpful. Apparently, that's fantastic. I also think, and I may have missed it, but I don't think so, I was listening intently, is we have made extra spaces. They've been our priority. Learners have been about these low arousal spaces to socially distance, and so we have kicked a few staff move them out of their offices to create more because of the vital importance. I have got a message that's come to me directly, so a lot won't see it, but could you explain please what Weston Bay on the Road is?
Yes, Weston Bay on the Road. So Weston Bay is our autism residential training facility that we have, which is just a separate provision really to our cross-college provision. So they have their own discrete curriculum called Aspirations that work with students to enable them to be able to progress on either into mainstream education or out, or they might need a year's break. But it's an opportunity to really work with students individually and tailor a program around their individual needs. So Weston Bay on the Road is basically where staff from Weston Bay will actually come out of that particular site and are coming across onto our cross-college campuses and running certain sessions for the learners that are studying on cross-college programs within these additional spaces that we've talked about. So really it's about meeting the needs. So for a cohort of students that are progressing on to university, what they're looking at particularly is transitioning onto HE, the getting ready for university life and what that entails, developing their study skills, working on those executive functioning. And so Weston Bay staff are coming out and hosting these groups alongside what, our dual curriculum to sort of target specifically areas that we've identified a group of students would really benefit from. So university skills, study skills, social skills, independent living skills. And really it's just about listening to the students, working with us collaboratively and finding out what is it that they need and what can we put together. I would say that, because of the COVID landscape, we aren't able to run it in the way that we would really like to, that would be more off-site. I'm a firm believer that social skills can't be taught in a classroom. We need to get out there into the community and actually practice and have those concrete learning experiences. But we are doing what we can within the constraints of where we find ourselves.
Thank you very much. I think that's fantastic. Please feel free to ask any further questions, even during the last slide, which next slide, please. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, team. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you to all of you. So here we are. Webinar has completed. I'm hoping that's really resonated and you've taken something and some elements of that and got you thinking. So just wanted to update you on the forthcoming hot topic webinars that we have over the next sort of between now and the end of January. The 9th of December, we've got Creating Motivational SEN Structures with Sam Mayhew. We have on the 13th of January, Empowering Independence for Learners with Complex Needs Through Digital Technology. And the 27th of January, we launch into our Employability series. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that's SEN learners progressing into the workplace. More as excitingly, because of demand, for those of you who had an invite, we launched a focus group for learning support. It's closed, and through to the demand of the idea and the concept where you can come together and in a professional environment via Zoom or Teams. It's not recorded. There are no minutes, but it's a chance for professionals just having a big open dialogue. We are going to launch 2 focus groups in January for SEN, Maths and English, and mental health and well-being. And we hope also to be able to launch in January as well, the trauma and attachment. So not a webinar. It's not about training per se. It's about professionals coming together in an open, closed and safe environment to just talk about those topics. So if you are interested, please do use the email at the bottom of that slide. That would be great to hear from you. If not, and you see it advertised, you may know someone within your teams or within your college or within your setting that may be interested. I'm really excited about actually what's coming up now right through to March, so please do keep an eye out on the ETF website. We may repeat ADHD again because of the demand we've had about taking it to a series 2. If not, we may be repeating it on that one because that was so well. So we've got a huge array of a selection in the new year. So without greater ado, we're going to pause the recording, stop the recording now. But if you've got any questions, even after this webinar, or you would like any of the amazing team that's delivered today to contact you and just chat through anything, then please do use the email address at the bottom of your screen. So I can only thank you on behalf of the SEND Centre of Excellence for joining us today, and to let you know that it will be sent to you next week, this recording, and it's accessible then after that on the ETF website. So many thanks everyone for joining us, and like I say, any further questions that this might inspire you to ask, or please do get in touch. Many thanks from all of us. Thank you.